Welcome to the Attention Deficit Disorder Expert Podcast Series by Attitude Magazine.
Hi, everyone. My name is Annie Rogers, and on behalf of the Attitude team, I'm pleased to welcome you to today's ADHD Experts presentation titled Teen Bullying Solutions, Help for Neurodivergent Adolescents. Leading today's presentation is Dr. Rosanna Breaux. Dr. Breaux is a licensed clinical psychologist, director of the Virginia Tech Child Study Center, and assistant professor of psychology. Her research focuses on the social, emotional, and academic functioning of children and adolescents, particularly those with ADHD. Today's webinar will address harmful bullying behavior at school and what parents and educators can do about it. We'll discuss ADHD-centered interventions and why kids with ADHD are more likely to experience bullying as the victim or as the perpetrator. We'd like to begin today's webinar by asking a poll question to our live audience. Which ADHD symptom or trait do you feel makes your child more vulnerable to bullying? Please select your answers, and you can comment in the text box under the video player to tell us more. Also, for answers to common webinar questions about things like slides, transcript, certificate of attendance, know that you can click on the FAQ tab of your webinar screen. If you're listening in replay or podcast mode, visit attitudemag.com and search podcast 458 to access the webinar resources. If you support the work we're doing here at Attitude to strengthen the ADHD community, we encourage you to visit attitudemag.com/subscribe and sign up for Attitude Magazine for yourself or to share with a teacher or a loved one who could benefit from greater ADHD understanding. You can click on the magazine tab on your screen to learn more about how to subscribe to Attitude. Finally, the sponsor of today's webinar is Play Attention, NASA-inspired technology that improves executive function and self-regulation. For more than 25 years, Play Attention has been helping children and adults thrive and succeed. Tufts University School of Medicine found Play Attention significantly improved attention, executive function, academic performance, and behavioral control of ADHD students. Your program will include a lifetime membership and a personal executive function coach to customize your plan along the way. Home and professional programs are available. You can call 828-676-2240 or click the link on your screen to schedule a free one-on-one consultation. You can also visit playattention.com to learn more. Attitude thanks our sponsors for supporting our webinars. Sponsorship has no influence on speaker selection or webinar content. So without any further ado, I'm so pleased to welcome Dr. Rosanna Breaux. Dr. Breaux, thank you so much for joining us today at Attitude and for leading this discussion on bullying in adolescents, especially among neurodivergent teens.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you to everyone in the audience for being here today. Before I jump into my talk, I just want to start briefly by defining what I mean by bullying and help distinguish that from rude or mean behavior. Bullying is hurtful behavior that is done repeatedly to individuals who have difficulty defending themselves. The hurtful behavior can be physical, such as pushing, verbal, such as name calling, or social, such as kind of gossiping or excluding others from one's group. Traditional bullying occurs through face-to-face interactions, whereas cyberbullying uses technology such as messenger apps, social media, or other digital platforms to perpetrate the hurtful behavior. Bullying is distinguished from rude or mean behavior in that rude behavior generally consists of kind of brief incidents of rudeness that are usually unplanned and spontaneous in considerations, whereas mean behavior is purposeful can include saying or doing something to hurt someone, but it's typically only occurring once or twice rather than being repeated in the sense of bullying. And the reason I start off by this is that as a society, I think the term bullying often gets thrown around and is used to label a range of behaviors, many of which can fall more under that rude, mean, or insensitive. And so we really want to be focusing on, or we're having these repeat intentional acts where there is an imbalance of power. So why are we talking about this through attitude and focusing specifically on a neurodivergent population or youth with ADHD? This is because we know that adolescents with ADHD or elevated ADHD symptoms, so not even if they are formally diagnosed, are at greater risk of both bullying perpetration as well as victimization. And this is true for both traditional face-to-face bullying as well as for cyberbullying. Just so you know, I will sometimes use the abbreviations BP and BV as shorthand to refer to bullying perpetration and bullying victimization in my slides. So I just want to note that up front. To give you a sense about these elevated rates among adolescents with ADHD, research suggests about 2/3 of youth with ADHD are victims of bullying, compared to only about 35% of youth without ADHD. Rates of perpetration are less. They're, depending on studies, between about 16 to 36% of youth with ADHD, relative to about 6% of the general population. And it's also important to note that a small portion of youth with ADHD are both victims and perpetrators. Additionally, it's important to note that both ADHD and bullying involvement share increased risks for a range of negative outcomes. This includes impaired peer relationships, poor academic performance, as well as comorbid mental health difficulties, including increased rates of depression and substance use in adolescents, which together really underscore the need for bullying prevention programs and interventions targeting risk factors for this vulnerable population. So when we think about risk factors, it's important to identify and target factors that are associated with increased prevalence of bullying, victimization, and perpetration in adolescents with ADHD so that we can better inform prevention and intervention efforts. Previous studies support that both individual and environmental factors relate to adolescents' involvement in bullying, both cyberbullying and traditional bullying. Some of these risk factors include demographic factors that cannot be really targeted or changed in an intervention, things such as being male, being a younger adolescent, or coming from a lower socioeconomic status. Specifically, research suggests that family financial strain, such as household food insecurity or being on government assistance, has been associated with both bullying, victimization, and perpetration. And so while those factors can't be changed, it is important for schools, mental health providers, and parents to be aware of these risk factors. Additionally, we know that factors like the presence of comorbid developmental delays, intellectual disabilities, or autism spectrum disorder in adolescents with ADHD has been linked to higher rates of bullying victimization. Sorry, I did not move that along while I was talking. In terms of factors that are able to be changed and consistent with this idea that younger adolescents are more at risk of experiencing bullying, victimization, and perpetration, I do want to briefly note some things to consider in terms of developmental changes within this population. So specifically, we know that children with ADHD are more likely to be victims of bullying or school violence in elementary school. However, by middle or junior high school, they're now more likely to be both victims and perpetrators. Although we know that school bullying problems generally tend to decrease by high school. And so thinking about different windows based off of age, and why we're focusing particularly on the adolescent developmental period is to really highlight this middle school period in particular, where we have increased risk for both victimization and perpetration. So what are those modifiable factors? Some of the factors that have been linked within the home environment are adolescents having low satisfaction with their family relationships, as well as having poor friendships, not having best friends, feeling like they don't have a social support system. There's also been research linking when schools are more frequently reporting problems home to parents, and this could be things related to engagement, related to disruptive behaviors in the school, that these individuals are going to be more likely to be victimized in a school setting. Additionally, there's extensive research suggesting that adolescents who display executive dysfunction and poor inhibition are more likely to be victimized. So these are people who have a hard time with things like organization, time management, planning, being able to regulate their emotions, being able to inhibit their behaviors and not act impulsively. Finally, it's important to note that youth with ADHD who display comorbid anxiety disorders are 3.5 times more likely to be bullied than those who do not have anxiety. And so the reason I want to highlight this is that we're seeing kind of across the ADHD spectrum, both those who are displaying more outright kind of disruptive behaviors, as well as those who may be displaying more internalizing anxious behaviors being at increased risk. In terms of risk factors related to bullying perpetration, some of the modifiable factors are things like lack of school engagement, which can include things as not participating in extracurricular activities, not completing or turning in homework assignments. Similar to what we saw with risk for bullying victimization, there's also research suggesting that when schools are reporting problems home more frequently, those youth with ADHD are also more likely to be perpetrators of bullying. And also similar to bullying victimization, we see some risk factors that are modifiable, including social difficulties, poor self-regulation. So this includes things like having a hard time staying calm, being more likely to argue with adults or friends, as well as overall just having poor management of one's behavior and emotions. I do want to note briefly that there is some differential risk factors for cyberbullying versus traditional bullying, although a lot of the same risk factors apply. Specifically, there's some evidence that frustration intolerance, as well as low reward responsiveness. So these are two areas that are commonly impaired among individuals with ADHD. So not being able to kind of manage feelings of frustration or anger, as well as kind of not responding the same way that we would expect to positive reinforcement, receiving praise or rewards for good behavior, are going to be linked to increased risk for cyberbullying, whereas more behavioral inhibition, as well as seeking out kind of risk or high fun events, have been more linked to traditional behavioral in-person bullying, which makes sense because we're thinking about kind of planning and doing something, which is what's often necessary for cyberbullying. You're not just acting in the moment, you're often having to type or kind of engage with something online. It makes sense that that's a little bit more planful and versus just someone who's reactive and lacks inhibition, which is what's often happening in the moment for traditional bullying. So when we think about treatments, I do want to kind of highlight some interesting research that's been found related to the role of medication, since many adolescents with ADHD are on stimulants. We know that And I do want to just note that this work has been done more related to aggression rather than bullying specifically, which obviously are not the same thing. But as I was just alluding to, there is a clear overlap between these constructs. And research suggests that while stimulants are helpful at addressing that kind of reactive aggression, that is getting explosive or responding to someone in an aggressive manner, kind of in response to them provoking you, which is often our bullying victimization group. We know that in contrast to that, stimulant medications can actually increase proactive aggression. And so that is when people are kind of premeditating their engagement in aggressive behaviors, which is often our bullying perpetrators, or again, is going to be more strongly linked to that cyberbullying, which takes a little bit of proactive planning. And this suggests that stimulants may not be an effective treatment for any of our adolescents with ADHD who are bullying perpetrators specifically, because it could actually backfire and lead to increased engagement in such bullying behaviors, but that it would be an effective treatment to help with regulation for our adolescents with ADHD who are experiencing victimization. So what are some behavioral interventions then that might help protect against bullying risks? I mentioned kind of the role of executive functioning as well as parent and peer involvement. So one intervention, the Challenging Horizons program, which is a school-based treatment model for both middle and high schoolers with ADHD that targets both social and academic challenges that these students often experience. Adolescents who are participating in Challenging Horizons meet with staff several times a week during the school week and learn organizational skills, study strategies, and social behaviors. There's also opportunities for parents to connect and learn some strategies and ways to help support these skills in their adolescence. Related to this, there are several more kind of clinic-based interventions. STAND is one example, which stands for Supporting Teens Autonomy Daily. And this is conducted with weekly therapy with both the parents and the adolescents with ADHD. And it focuses on areas of attention, motivation, and organization. And because we know that adolescents who have difficulties in these areas are at risk for underperforming in school, as well as having strained relationships with their family members, which are two of those risk factors we discussed. So both of these, school-based as well as clinic-based interventions could help address some of the risk factors that we discussed, like family relationships, social friendship difficulties, as well as executive functioning that are linked to bullying. Another intervention that can help address some of these modifiable factors is the relax intervention. And this is really targeting those issues related to self-control and emotion dysregulation that are linked to bullying perpetration. And so the relax intervention, which is an intervention I developed for adolescents with ADHD, targets emotion regulation, conflict management, and communication skills, and has been found to significantly improve emotion regulation and communication in the adolescents, as well as significantly reduce aggression with peers, as well as family conflict. And so this is also a clinic-based intervention that could help, although has not yet been evaluated for reducing risk for bullying perpetration, specifically only aggressive behavior. So right now I kind of covered some of the existing interventions, behavioral interventions, medication. I want to spend the rest of my time really highlighting specific resources and specific strategies that parents first and then schools can do to help address bullying in neurodivergent adolescents. Okay, so if we're focusing first on kind of caregivers and parents, I want to kind of put out the disclaimer first and foremost that there's currently limited research on how parents can help children and adolescents who are being bullied. And this is because school bullying is often a group behavior that is maintained by peers who are kind of silently supporting the bullying by, not intervening, not saying something, or, being reluctant to actively defend the victim, which can make it really hard for teachers and parents, as well as school administrators, to be able to effectively intervene. Second, and this is something I definitely want to make sure we spend some time on today, is that many bullied children and adolescents are reluctant to ask for help, often believing that adults won't help or can't help or going to actually make things worse by trying to help. That said, there are several things that parents and caregivers can do to help prevent and limit the negative effects of bullying when it does occur for adolescents. So first is to look for signs that your adolescent might be struggling socially with peer relationships at school. This could include things like reluctance to go to school, a limited desire to spend time with peers outside of school or to engage in a particular setting, maybe like an extracurricular that they used to want to go to that now they're seeming to not want to go to, potentially indicating that bullying is going on there. This could also be a change for academic performance, where you're all of a sudden seeing a drop in the adolescent's grades. We know that it's important for adolescents to be able to have support, and often that's not going to come from the parents. So yes, some adolescents will confide in their parents about difficulties that they're having with classmates, but others are going to be reluctant to do so. And so we still want to encourage adolescents to seek out support from others like older siblings, teachers, mentors, counselors, or extended family members like an aunt or uncle. Regardless of who it is, having someone who they can talk to and problem solve through with the bullying can really help them, be able to externalize their feelings so that they're not keeping them inside, which is going to, potentially increase the likelihood of seeing negative mood or even kind of reactive behavioral responses. It also can help your adolescents feel less alone as they are experiencing the bullying, and help them generate a plan for how to reduce the risk of bullying or stop the bullying from occurring. And some of the strategies related to that is, really helping encourage your adolescent once you do know that bullying is occurring or it seems like things might be going on in certain situations. It is, when possible, to help them stay away from the places where it's happening, or if they have to be in those situations, making sure that they're staying near adults or other peers, because we know that bullying is most likely to happen, particularly when adults are not around. So when adolescents are kind of on their own, but recognizing that we know many adolescents with ADHD are struggling to make those connections socially, and so figuring out who their kind of safe people can be. I do want to just note, so adolescence is a period where there's a lot of changes in mood and behavior. So while some of the common kind of red flags we often discuss are things like your adolescents acting differently, seeming more anxious, seeming moodier than usual, not eating or sleeping well, there are a lot of reasons why these things can be going on. It is good to be aware that these things are happening, but looking for more concrete things, like maybe avoiding certain things, like not wanting to use a bathroom at school, not wanting to go to unsupervised social events, or seeming upset after they've had a phone call, a text, a FaceTime, or received an email, not wanting to hang out with friends that they previously did hang out with. Those are some kind of more concrete red flags or risk factors that we can be looking for, rather than just kind of changes in mood, behavior, academic performance, which might not only be associated with bullying. Because we know it is such a hard thing for an adolescent to come forward to an adult or to a parent to let them know about their experiences with bullying. It's really important that you make sure that your adolescent feels heard and supported when they do come to you with that. Thank them for being brave, acknowledge that they did the right thing by coming to you with this, treat their concerns seriously, validate the emotions that they're experiencing as a result of that. That said, we want to make sure that parents don't act hastily. So oftentimes well-intentioned parents, will jump in and want to call the parents of the alleged bullies or call the school. And it's important to kind of take a step back and first focus on whether your adolescent feels safe. Can they return to school safely? If you suspect that your adolescent is being bullied and is not safe to attend school, then it is a good idea to contact your adolescent's school or teacher or counselor or principal. And again, the focus there should be on safety, not necessarily on, punishing or changes in plans. It's, can there be a plan to help prevent bullying from happening in the future and keep them safe while this plan is being worked out? Involving your adolescent in the discussion of that plan is really important. Asking them what they think might be helpful in this situation rather than you being the one driving that conversation or jumping right into action. As I mentioned a little bit ago when we were discussing interventions for adolescents with ADHD, one of the effective things that parents can do when your adolescent is experiencing bullying is to really help teach them effective emotion regulation and coping skills. Parents can help coach their adolescents on different healthy ways to cope. So, talking about, well, when I'm feeling really hurt by something a friend did, I like to draw or listen to music or go for a run. What are coping strategies you use to help yourself feel better? You can also really problem solve with them and talk through how can they respond in the face of bullying. This is things like encouraging them to be assertive and, if it's standing up to peer pressure or reacting in kind of a calm manner and walking away. There's a lot of research that supports the idea that when bullying victims show signs of being hurt, like crying or withdrawing, or if they act in a really reactive manner and getting kind of upset about it, it leads to more bullying for those adolescents. So being able to kind of coach them beforehand, even do some role playing to help them practice what they might want to say in these situations, helping them build those coping skills like taking deep breaths so that they can remain calm in the moment and then process their feelings afterwards can be really helpful to reduce the risk for bullying being an ongoing issue. Of note, there is also research to support the fact that having even one meaningful friendship can really help reduce the negative effects of being bullied. And while there isn't overly strong evidence to support ways to improve social functioning in adolescence, parents can encourage coping through social interactions by helping promote positive peer interactions. This could be involvement in youth groups or extracurricular activities like sports teams, or helping encourage your adolescent to build friendships in areas of interest. For many adolescents with ADHD, this could be even things like building friendships with peers online while they're gaming. It doesn't have to be in the traditional extracurriculars, but having even one person who they feel like they can go to and talk to who understands them can really help reduce the negative outcomes associated with bullying victimization. Finally, I do want to note, at least briefly, that things like setting limits and monitoring your adolescent's online activity is important, especially when you know that there is cyberbullying going on. It's important to help encourage your adolescents to develop safe online behaviors. So this could include things like discussing what is or is not okay to post online or share with others on social media, who it is and is not okay to chat with online or while playing video games. and what to do if they feel like someone is threatening them or sends them something or posts something hurtful about them online. Acknowledging that this happens and being aware of it and helping them kind of proactively think through how would I respond or what can I do can be really helpful if it does occur for your adolescent. I do just want to kind of briefly share these resources related to that. There are a lot of different parental control apps on the market, and unfortunately, most of them do have monthly or yearly fees. But here are two well-rated ones, Aura and Bark. And these apps can enable parents to filter, block, and monitor websites and apps. They also allow you to set screen time limits and track internet usage, which can be really important for adolescents with ADHD who often are spending, exceedingly large amounts of time on technology. They also can help keep your adolescents safe from a range of different kind of predatory, scam, as well as cyberbullying behaviors by sending alerts based off of both in-game voice as well as text monitoring that are built in to alert you to issues of potential cyberbullying. Another resource that is great both for parents and caregivers as well as schools is stopbullying.gov. This website has many different strategies that parents and school staff can use to help prevent bullying by talking about it and helping build a safe school environment, as well as implementing community-wide bullying prevention strategies. We know that in order for bullying to kind of be prevented, there needs to be efforts over time. Just doing a single kind of talk on anti-bullying or see something, say something is not going to be adequate for shifting the system and helping kind of students feel like they have a safe place to go or they know what to do. Because there are no federal mandates for bullying curriculums, stopbullying.gov is a really nice place for schools to go to that provides resources for evidence-based programs, as well as materials for staff trainings and activities that teachers can use to help teach students about bullying and bullying prevention. Building on that, I just want to note, given evidence kind of suggesting a link between bullying and suicide-related behavior and an increased risk for suicide attempts among adolescents with ADHD, that there are some resources like this one here by the National Center for Injury Prevention and Control, which discusses this relationship between bullying and suicide and provides concrete strategies that schools can implement. I can share this link with you all for this resource in the materials that will be included with the webinar and podcast. But I'll just highlight some of the strategies that are included in this document, which include things like helping encourage that connectedness with school or involvement with school, teaching coping strategies as part of school, which obviously in the aftermath of the pandemic is important for also reducing risks for anxiety and depression that all adolescents are experiencing, but that we're seeing increased rates for adolescents with ADHD. Another thing that this resource talks about is helping teach school personnel about vulnerable populations, which includes students with ADHD, as well as some of those risk factors that I discussed in the beginning of my talk, as well as appropriate ways to intervene in bullying situations. It also provides a lot of support and referral information for the youth who are involved, and talks about the importance of including families in this. So rather than just intervening, kind of addressing it in the moment, and really talks about the importance of empowering youth. And one of the big things it focuses on here is trying to provide concrete, positive, and proactive ways that adolescents can help influence the social norms of their peers, so that bullying is kind of viewed as an uncool behavior or something that's not acceptable, rather than just kind of responding to each incident in the moment. Also related to this, I just want to briefly share 2 different crisis lines for adolescents if they might be experiencing suicidal ideations. Specifically, 988 is the new designated 3-digit dialing code that will route callers to the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. This is also known as the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline, and this is active across the United States, as well as the Trevor Lifeline, which is specific for adolescent members of the LGBTQIA+ community. So before I open it up for questions, I just want to give a quick recap of some of the main things that we discussed today. First, adolescents with ADHD are at increased risk of both bullying victimization and bullying perpetration. And it's important that parents and school staff are aware of this risk and monitor for changes in behavior or performance, such as not wanting to hang out with their peers or drops in grades, as well as more kind of concrete avoidance of specific situations like bathrooms at schools or going to sports practice, because this could be an indication that the adolescent is being bullied. Second, research supports the importance of equipping adolescents with ADHD with effective coping skills and improving their emotion regulation and executive functioning skills to help reduce the risk of bullying. Additionally, research highlights the importance of school connectedness and positive family and peer relationships to reduce the negative impacts of bullying. It's really important that adolescents don't keep their feelings inside and that they have support from peers or family members to be able to problem solve through how to deal with the bullying or to reduce the risk that that they're going to be a perpetrator of bullying if they're the one who's actively been engaging in bullying behaviors. So I just want to thank you for your attention so far. I can now take questions. I saw people posting as we were going, and I know that the moderator has some questions that were already collected before. I will just note that on the bottom of this slide, I have included my lab website information if you'd like to stay up to date on our research studies, including the relaxed intervention study that I mentioned, as well as other resources for families of children and adolescents with ADHD.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Breaux. Before we head into the Q&A, I want to just quickly thank Play Attention once more for sponsoring today's webinar. And I also wanted to circle back to our survey results because they were quite interesting. We asked which ADHD symptom or trait makes your child most vulnerable to bullying, in your opinion. So those people watching, the number one was poor social skills. I'm wondering if you have suggestions specifically for improving social skills among even, pre-middle school children, kind of working up and realizing that middle school is an inflection point. Suggestions on how parents might help guide their students to be better prepared when they get to middle school.
Yeah, great question. And I think, the ADHD world, that is probably one of the hardest things for us to be able to really make change in is the social deficits. But we know that lots of different things can help. So some of those things, like as you mentioned with younger kids, is really kind of talking through some of the things that could come up, making them aware of what is or isn't kind of bullying behavior, peer pressure that might be going on, helping them think through proactively ways to respond. So being able to kind of just say, thank you and walk away, or being able to take that deep breath and actually find that time so that they're not kind of reacting to what was said in a mean way, really focusing on 2 different pieces. So one is recognizing that they can only be in control of their own behavior. They can't control what other kids are doing. So just because other kids are being mean or engaging in this behavior doesn't mean that they should be mean or engage in aggressive behavior, and because that's only going to lead to them getting in trouble. Some of the building blocks for social skills that we can also work on early are related to this kind of emotion regulation and self-regulation of behaviors. So being able to identify emotions in themselves and others, recognizing, how did you feel when someone said something mean to you? Particularly if your adolescent or child is the bully themselves, kind of helping with some of that perspective taking, helping them think through more effective ways to communicate, setting kind of those clear expectations in the home environment. So not modeling kind of the use of name calling or belittling behavior, because that's kind of showing that that's acceptable. Similarly, when yes, all siblings are going to be often picking or fighting with each other, but, communicating, it's okay to be upset or hurt, but it's not okay to get physical, or it's not okay to use name calling, to help kind of model that and teach that early and in the home to hopefully help extend it to the peer environment.
Okay, thank you. That was very helpful. The second biggest challenge that parents cited was one that you touched on in depth, and that was emotional regulation. And I know that is kind of a cornerstone of the Relax program. Could you tell us the ages that are served by the Relax program? Is it strictly for teenagers, or does it start younger than that?
Yeah, so Relax was developed for middle school and high school adolescents. So it's been used with 11 to 17-year-olds right now. And a lot of that is because just that self-regulation abilities and being able to do that kind of by yourself rather than with the support of a parent or a teacher, that's really developing during the adolescent developmental period. We know in elementary school, oftentimes, particularly children with ADHD whose frontal lobes are about 3 years lagging behind the development of typically developing children, are really going to struggle with those things. And so their ability to learn these skills and actively implement these skills in their day-to-day life are going to be hard. It doesn't mean we can't do that, but it's often much more guided and supported by parents or teachers. So, having a, toolkit that they can use, a calm place that they can go to, different strategies is going to be more what we're focusing on in the elementary period versus kind of having some of these behavioral and cognitive strategies that they can implement to help regulate later on.
Okay, wonderful. And the third most cited challenge was low self-esteem. And we had a number of people asking today whether there's evidence that specifically martial arts can help to improve, self-esteem and also confidence in social settings. A number of people who have said they've had success with their children, and even someone who's done some training. And I wonder if there are also other activities that are particularly helpful in the realm of self-esteem.
Yeah, so there's a lot of different really good points that you were hitting on there. So I'm going to try to address all of them. I want to start by just acknowledging, clinically, I always talk about this fact that people bully kind of with this idea of I'm okay because you're not. And so a lot of times when people are engaging in bullying perpetration, it's to make themselves feel better. And so that's also why we often have bullying victims and perpetrators, which is that, they've been bullied, which then can make their self-esteem worse. And so then they act out and try to kind of make themselves feel better by bullying or belittling someone else. And so I think definitely self-esteem is such a critical factor related to this. And so the broader thing there is, yes, helping your adolescents or your children identify, things that are areas of strength for them, helping them focus on that, helping them really focus on, the social relationships that are going well, rather than kind of just dwelling in on this one thing, which is often a vulnerability or an area of insecurity for the child or adolescent that the bully is picking up on. Regarding martial arts, Taekwondo, there is a lot of research supporting in general physical activity, but specifically, these physical activities that also have a mindfulness component, which kind of ties into and the self-regulation component, which is what we were just talking about, which martial arts, Taekwondo definitely have. And so I don't off the top of my head know of research that specifically links that to bullying reduction. It definitely has been linked to management of ADHD symptoms and self-regulation, which, as we talked about, are related to risk for bullying. And so I don't know for sure that research has not been done, but it makes sense that would be helpful.
Okay. Yes. Wonderful. And you brought up the point of how um, children who are bullied easily become bullies. And we had a great question on this topic specifically. Someone wrote to say kids with ADHD feel pushed around by society, especially because, and then they're also especially sensitive. But then they bring that rage home and they bully their siblings almost as a form of relief. Can you offer any advice for parents to help their children see that they're hurting others? And as this person wrote in, to stop the circle of doom.
Yeah, I mean, and I think you're kind of somewhat answering your own question with this. Like, the communication is so key in these situations. Trying to understand what's leading to your child acting out when they get home. Oftentimes we see this pattern of kids kind of hold it together all day, or, they've had a really bad day. And so they come home and they unleash. And whether that's through emotional behavioral dysregulation or, being mean to a sibling or a pet, trying to understand what's leading to that. Again, kind of going back to what I mentioned earlier of helping them try to understand, well, how did you feel in these situations when so-and-so, said something mean to you? How might your sister feel when you said this to her? And kind of setting those clear expectations of, it makes sense that you were upset or because X, Y, or Z happened at school today, but it's not okay for you to take that out on your sister, and helping them problem solve through. So when you're upset, what are some other things, and really tying that back into those coping skills? What are effective ways to manage that hurt, that frustration, that feeling of hopelessness or insecurity?
Okay. And the fourth most cited challenge from our survey was impulsivity. And how a lot of people see that play out is that their child is bullied and then they respond and they end up getting in trouble. And so a number of parents are asking about scripts. Is it helpful to prepare scripts in advance? And do you have any specific suggestions on things that, an adolescent could say to a bully to diffuse the situation, but not, but to still, stand up for themselves?
Yeah, this is probably one of the hardest things that I hear, clinically all the time, where the kid who's being bullied kind of has finally had so much and just feels like they need to act out. And so I think the idea of scripts, we see that a lot more with the neurodivergent population, particularly the autistic community. And I think it can be helpful depending on the age of your child or adolescent, and kind of if that's something that's worked for them in other situations, really kind of thinking through, here are some things that you can say. That's very similar to kind of this idea of problem solving. I think what worries me about scripts specifically is we don't know exactly what they're going to say, or same thing with problem solving. And so whether it's kind of focusing on the just kind of having a take a deep breath and calmly walk away, because that is still standing up for yourself. I think that's one of those things that we often overlook, is like, if we don't have the last word or if we don't react, we're basically accepting it. And in the face of bullying, that's not often the case. If they then continue to follow the child or kind of keep engaging, that's where then the working and helping problem solve. So praising your child for being able to maintain that control, but helping them think through. So when they're doing that, if they're following you, where can you go so that you're not kind of at risk of continuing to do it? I think the idea of being able to talk through ways, and it's hard because right now we're kind of talking very in the subjective and without knowing, is a good strategy overall, but we don't always know what exactly the situation will be. And so going back to that point of really having your adolescent focus on themselves and not getting aggressive, not kind of showing that tears or emotion, and kind of recognizing and validating that is really hard, but we know that that's going to help, kind of falls into that same idea of scripting or kind of problem solving through ways to react.
Mm-hmm. I have to say that I recently heard, I don't know if it's good or bad, but I liked it. Someone suggested as a response, very simply, your opinion of me is none of my business, and walk away. And I think it's like just confusing enough that it makes them stop and think, and then off you go.
Yeah. And I have heard that, I think one of the things, if some adolescents with ADHD have great senses of humor, so being able to turn it into a joke, which I think that kind of falls under, is a great way to respond for some adolescents with ADHD. If that's not natural, or your adolescent is not someone who humor comes easily to, or that they're going to struggle with, that's probably not a great way to respond. But figuring out, and that's going to be different for each child or adolescent, kind of how they can kind of take it on in a calm manner, kind of acknowledge it, or keep walking away.
Right. No, good point. I feel like that's one I wish I had said when I was a kid. Okay. So we saw also in our survey that quite a few parents cited this phenomenon that we call RSD, rejection sensitive dysphoria. And that, many, both children, teens, and adults with ADHD experience this, where a very small slight feels enormous. It feels physically painful.
Yeah.
And someone wrote in and said, sometimes a student with neurodiversity perceives bullying or feels that others are being mean, but upon further nuanced understanding of the situation, it seems they're misreading the situation. Parents, can't see for themselves, and they sort of, are trying to help their child advocate. How can an educator deal with a situation like this, and a parent, to help see if this is true bullying or if it's a case of, RSD?
That's a great question. I think that goes back to one of the first slide that I had of, some of it is, is this just one time happen, and trying to understand, and yes, recognizing that there's always two sides to the story. And so the way that our adolescent is presenting it or perceiving it might not be how it was intended is important. So that also goes back to that idea of asking your adolescent sometimes, well, what do you think would be helpful in addressing this? And so that can give you an insight into well, is this something that every single day they're doing this thing to them? Or was it just, oh, well, they only said it one time, so, I probably can just ignore it or talk through it. Or helping them kind of, again, recognizing this difference of, is it something that, you think, I'll use the bumping into you in a hallway, because when people are changing classes, that happens all the time. Helping them recognize, well, could it just be that they were looking at their phone, or that they were rushing? What are some other possibilities? And helping them kind of see and generate some of that. Not in the moment, is that going to always be possible, but kind of talking through that. If they're kind of saying, well, so-and-so is always being mean to me, or so-and-so is always picking on me or bullying me, to help them kind of really tease apart what was the context. We don't want to make our adolescents feel like they're responsible for the bullying occurring, but that can be a way when it is potentially that, your adolescent is just very reactive or sensitive, to really tease apart, is this child actually bullying, or is this an incident of actual bullying versus just them being overly sensitive?
Right. And, we had a number of questions related to this, and that was, children who have pulled back socially, who are refusing to join clubs, to play sports that they used to enjoy. One person wrote, we're moving schools for my son. He's experienced bullying from elementary school to high school with the same group of students. I would love to give him advice on how to get into a group, but he's very cautious about joining groups. He's been rejected so many times. And this question was repeated over and over again in different circumstances.
Yeah.
Advice for those parents who, they obviously, the best place to build social skills is in a safe and supportive social environment. But how can you get your child, who is understandably very cautious, to try again?
100%. I just want to validate, how hard that is, and the importance of kind of, first off, wonderful for those parents for advocating for their adolescent and moving schools and trying to help set them up for success. I do think thinking about sometimes smaller group social interactions. So even with one or two other peers who have similar interests to them, rather than kind of trying to jump into a sport, even if it's a sport they typically enjoyed. So, if they were previously on the basketball team and that's where bullying occurred, can they, if there's someone who they know likes basketball as well, ask them if they want to shoot hoops or something after school. And so trying to find ways for positive peer interactions. It's hard once you get to high school. Teachers don't really have great insight the way elementary school teachers do of what are some, shared students with shared interests. But helping them kind of maybe identify who some of those people are, or encouraging that even if it's online. And sometimes once they have that confidence of interacting with, someone from school online rather than face-to-face, being able to move that to a one-on-one face-to-face can really help. And thinking about, sometimes things that are less competitive, so like music performances or things like that, can still be ways to forge social connections, but allow them to be able to be successful on an independent thing as well, which can help with things like self-esteem and confidence, which can then help support the building positive peer relationships, because it's hard when you don't feel great about yourself to put your best self out there and want to connect with your peers.
Yes, absolutely. We have a number of educators listening in today, and quite a few who are saying they feel that COVID has had a real impact on the way that their students are interacting with one another, whether, there are suggestions that it even seems to be increasing bullying behaviors, and wondering if there are any really updated trainings for teachers or ideas about how schools can pivot, alter their bullying practices and policies to respond to what many educators perceive as kind of a new and harsher environment.
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I think, first one, I just validate that the teachers are not alone in that perception. We have data now supporting kind of these increased aggressive behaviors, increases in, swearing, verbal disruptions in the classroom that are happening in middle schools and high schools. And so that's definitely, associated things to bullying for sure. The evidence on bullying has been a little bit more mixed in terms of cyberbullying, whether it's increasing or decreasing during the pandemic. But I think this reality of this shift back to in-person and students having, 2 years where they really had disruptions to social interactions and not opportunities to practice social skills and self-regulation in the same way, certainly has contributed to this. To the question of relevant resources, I don't know of any, partially because of the nature of things taking time. I don't know of anything that has been COVID specific. That stopbullying.gov, I do think, is a really nice resource that has and keeps updating with the evidence-based strategies, which has, different activities, again, that the teachers can use with students in the classroom, or that administrators can use for staff trainings during different, like in service days or teacher days, to be able to kind of learn some of those strategies for how to manage bullying when it occurs in the classroom or in the school environment.
Okay,
so
wonderful.
The best resource that comes to mind.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. Okay. Well, and we'll make sure, I know that was linked in your presentation, and we'll make sure to include that, as well as a couple of people had asked about more details on Relax. So we'll include links to those in the follow-up email to everyone who registered. And I have one more quick question to sneak in, because it was quite common. A number of folks having their kids, having trouble getting their children to open up about what's happening at school. And to talk with them, whether it's because of shame or they just want to leave it behind, understandably. But any tips for parents on how to get, especially their teenagers, to talk to them?
Yeah, I was going to say we could do an entire hour just on that, because that's one of the most challenging things. I think a couple things that come to mind there is, one, letting them kind of come to you when they're ready, not forcing it. That dreaded question of like, how was your day or how was school is not a good way to get them to open up. I think knowing your adolescents and trying to find those times. So for some, if you drive your kids into school that morning ride of, what are you asking questions that are more kind of, what are you looking forward to today? Or, is there anything that you're worried about today? To kind of open those conversations. And then over time, making sure that when they do come to you with things, that you're providing supportive, validating responses. One of the main reasons why adolescents cite that they don't go to their parents is that they feel like they don't understand, or that they're kind of will often just jump to like trying to fix it. Whereas sometimes they just want to be heard and validated, or kind of sit with that, like, yeah, this is really hard, or this is challenging. And they get that more from their peers than they do from adults, and particularly parents who jump to the trying to solve it. And so one of the strategies that I'll often use is like, what do you need right now? Do you just want me to listen? Do you want me to help you solve? Do you just want, to vent? And so being able to meet them where they're at in that moment and find that time. So for some, it's while you're cooking dinner. For some, it's on, the drive to sports practices or school or something like that. But putting that out there, responding in a supportive manner, and over time, helping them realize that you are a safe person that they can go to for support, rather than forcing it on your terms and when you want it.
That is wonderful. And I will mention that we have a great article in the summer issue of Attitude Magazine on this exact topic of not trying to fix every problem that your adolescent brings to you. And I know I personally struggle with this, so I recommend everyone read that. But in the meantime, we are at the close of our time today. Dr. Breaux, thank you so much for leading this presentation today and for answering so many of our listeners' questions. We really appreciate your contributions to the ADHD community. And thank you also to our listeners today for such great questions. We hope that you will join us for more free webinars. So make sure you don't miss that or any other upcoming webinars, articles, research updates. You can sign up for our free newsletters at attitudemag.com/newsletters. If you're listening in replay or podcast mode, visit attitudemag.com and search podcast 458 to access the webinar resources. If you support the work we're doing here at Attitude to strengthen the ADHD community, we encourage you to visit attitudemag.com/subscribe and sign up for Attitude Magazine for yourself, or to share with a teacher or a loved one who could benefit from greater ADHD understanding. Thank you again, Dr. Breaux, and thank you everyone for joining us today.
For more Attitude podcasts and information on living well with attention deficit, visit attitudemag.com. That's ADDITUDEMAG.com.